Hello everyone, this is Alex here again. I'm back from my most recent trip to Canada, and this review session shows some of the first images I've chosen to process from that trip. They're not necessarily, I haven't actually edited those pictures down very thoroughly yet, so I wouldn't say these represent all the very best shots. They're certainly some of my favourites that were quick to pull out, but they've been chosen for lots of different reasons. But anyway, there's 50 to go through, so I better get a move on. Because all the pictures come from one trip, just a brief comment on the equipment used. I used Nikon D850 on this trip. Shot in super housing, retro strobes as usual. You can see the camera data on the right hand side if you're viewing this in high on HD settings on YouTube in full screen. You should be able to read all the camera settings. I haven't uploaded any of these pictures to my website yet, but of course they will do in the future. And on there, you can also pick up the pictures and pick out the pictures and look at the camera settings on the website if there is something you're interested in. But generally, I'll try and come back to this page fairly regularly so you see most of the camera settings. Nothing particular. Well, I guess two noteworthy things equipment-wise. One is I had the forthcoming Nauticam 160-degree lens for the EMWL bug-eye lens system. And was using that for the first time, and I'll point those pictures out as we go through. And also, I think one thing that's quite unusual is I wasn't really using wet close-up lenses on this trip for my macro, but I was using a dry close-up lens, a close-up lens that actually went inside the housing, because I felt in the cold water it was easier just to have this on all the time, because I wasn't really shooting anything very distant, and I was using a Nikon 5T for that. Rather than be sort of dealing with flippers and having the flipper in the way and falling down and all that stuff that normally goes on with those hinges. So I think that's kind of the only. Otherwise, I was shooting standard fisheye lens or the bug eye lens or the 60mm macro lens or the 105mm macro lens. So fairly conservative set of gear for the conditions. The photos are from Browning Pass near Port Hardy, at the northern end of Vancouver Island. The area is perhaps best known from the resort that we were based at, God's Pocket. And many people just refer to the area as God's Pocket because the resort is such a lovely place to stay. Right, so let's run through some pictures. So first up is this picture. I think it's a quillback rockfish. It's a very unusual colour one. It's a very yellow one. And it was sitting on a yellow sponge, so it made for a very simple, nice portrait. Just a standard kind of 105 portrait, shot with fast shutter speed to get the black background. This is one of my favourite fish in the area, which is a small fish called a scaly head sculpin. They're a bit like a kind of a large blenny or large goby. Characterful, territorial, can be very pretty in this area. But for me, I'm always targeting finding them on really great backgrounds. So this one here sitting in plumos and enemies, making kind of I guess this will make a good Christmas card sometime. Right, this is the first of the EMWL1 pictures, and this is taken with the 160mm lens of a large nudibranch. They're sometimes called they're sometimes called clown nudibranchs. But they're a handsome individual, and shot here with a closed aperture of f20. When you're shooting these wide-angle macro pictures, you're always fighting a lack of depth of field. And although this is shot at f20, you can see the kelp in the background isn't sharp, but I made sure that the front of the nudibranch here and the rhinophore at the top here, that's what my depth of field I was trying to hold for. So at least the face of the nudibranch was as sharp as possible, and then the background of the image is giving me the setting, giving me the environment in which it's living in. From the same dive, so the same lens. These are in chronological order, so you'll often see pictures from the same dive. This is a sharp-nosed crab, one of the common crab species in the area. This is a big male with his big pincers, climbing on that same kelp actually that's in the background of the previous picture. I think it's called sea palm, in a common name. Right, this is another scaly head sculpin, and this one here you can see it's beautifully on this lovely red soft coral. Nice attractive fish. I normally have the zoom set to 200 for this. I wonder how I change that. That's going to confuse me. Right, how do I wonder if there we go, 200, there we go. So I can zoom in a bit more for the screen. This is a scaly head sculpin, and generally you can see how I shot this on aperture f8 to blur that background. these colourful backgrounds are fantastic there, but they can be quite distracting. So I like to shoot them generally with a shallow depth of field, just to blur them out. And then they just make for these super eye-popping macro frames. They just, where it's colour all the way to the corners. It's just a copper rockfish dorsal fin and a detail of a copper rockfish eye. The same individual fish. It's quite common with the rockfish, which are relatives of scorpion fish, but mid-water fish rather than seabed fish. That every now and again you'll find particularly accommodating individuals. I often think they're just too cold to want to move away. It is quite cold diving up in Canada, British Columbia on the Pacific, on the Pacific coast, and every now and again you bump into a really obliging individual. So it's a good opportunity to make some close-ups, some details. They've got great colour, got nice eyes. Lots of nice features on the fins, so it's a good chance to get the pictures. This is an opalescent nudibranch. They're a very common species of nudibranch up there, and thankfully handsome as well. White body with these lovely golden orangey tips to the carata on his back. Nice ridged rhinophores. Very classic nudibranch look, and good to photograph. This one's on a piece of kelp, which is a little bit dirty, but the good thing about kelp is it really sucks light. So when you have a white nudibranch on dark kelp, that kelp foreground is almost black, and then I was able to frame it as it came over the top of the kelp and get this nice black background. This is a young vermilion rockfish. I'd not photographed this species before. I don't particularly like this very side-on composition. It kind of looks like it's dead on a slab rather than swimming around in the ocean. It was at night, so I didn't have much option, and it was a species that I was keen to record. But it's not a great picture. It's been processed because it was very, very fast to process, because the original file looked just like that. So it was about a 10-second job to get that processed out. Some more nudibranchs. This is a Janulus species. You can't see his I've forgotten what the name of that little ridge, that flap that they have between their rhinophores is on Janulus. You can't see that little flap. I'm sure it will come back to me in a minute. It's got a funny name, and it's very close to a Japanese word for something as well, but I've forgotten the name of it. And this is one of my favourite nudibranchs in the area. They call it the frosted nudibranch for obvious reasons. Again, pretty common up there. I mean, and in fact, one thing that characterised the diving around God's Pocket is a real superabundance of subject matter. So you're never struggling for long before you find another great thing to photograph. There's not the same biodiversity as in the tropics, but I think that in many ways makes the scenery more attractive, because you have less colours, less ingredients in the palette, and it tends to create graphically stronger environments to look at. But the density of life is just mind-blowing, and so you really are just bouncing from one subject onto the next. And I really like these frosted nudies, and I have lots of photos of them to process. I don't know quite why I pressed this particular one first, but I do like how I do like the frame, particularly small like this. It looks really nice. It looks kind of like a bit like a flower. This is a sailfin sculpin. The sculpins kind of dominate most of the sort of benthic fish life there. And they do kind of, if you're used to diving in other places, they do feel like they've evolved to fill niches that are filled by very different families of fish. This sailfin sculpin always reminds me of a dragonette, even though it's a sculpin. And the scaly heads we were looking at before, they look very much like small gobies or blennies, whereas the red iris lord, which I'm sure we'll see plenty of as we go through these pictures, is like a scorpion fish. They kind of, this sculpin family has diversified to fill in all these little niches. Here's another scaly head sculpin. You can see how it's very goby or blenny like. This one here sitting on the sulfur yellow or the yellow encrusting sponge in this picture, so making for a nice background. There's lots of this yellow sponge, lots of the red soft coral around, and usually when I find some, I'm always searching over it if I have a macro lens for any good macro subjects, knowing it's going to give me such a colourful frame and a great background. This is a Stimson Sea Star. Just the detail of the gills on the top of it. I just like the pattern of this. I think, again, really is a smaller shot with the pattern. I think when you see it like this, it looks really nice. And the next one is one of the sort of speciality fish of the area, not that the others aren't. But this is a moss head war bonnet, or a mossy as we often call them for short. And this one here lives underneath the dock at God's Pocket. So it's one that you're going to see a few photos of, because every time we went in for a night dive, we had the chance to photograph this guy, because he was in 2.5-3 meters of water directly underneath the dive shed, which is a floating dive shed. So it really, you didn't even have to move your feet to get to him. And he was a really great subject, because war bonnets are not the easiest subjects to find. So this mosshead war bonnet was really, really nice to see. And he was living in an old bottle, which made him very easy to locate. And the bottles, obviously, as they are in the tropics with blennies and things like that, and little gobies living inside them, are very photogenic subjects. This guy was always kind of sticking out. Oh, here's a red Irish lord, kind of like the scorpion fish ambush predator of the area. And when they're in such colourful environments, they take on really colourful hues as well. This one I like just because I don't think it's the best shot of a red Irish lord, but it was in a fantastic setting for a little wide angle shot, with those sort of fields of plumos, white plumos, anemones in the background, and then you've got the sulphur yellow sponge and the red soft coral dominating the foreground, and a nice bit of sunbeams coming through in the background. I didn't shoot as much wide angle on this trip as I have on previous trips to the area. This was shot with a fisheye. And I think that's partly because we didn't have, or I would say primarily because we didn't have the best visibility during the trip. It was good, but not as good as it can be. And I think I felt that it wasn't the best use of not quite perfect conditions to do too much wide angle, because I knew I'd ultimately feel it wasn't as good as I'd got there before, because the conditions were down a bit. And so I sort of biased myself a little bit towards macro for that reason. I'd also say that I've processed a lot of macro pictures at this stage, because I have a big macro talk coming up at the British Society of Underwater Photographers. We're launching we're doing a special evening as tribute to Martin Edge, and I'm giving a macro talk as the inaugural B-Soup Martin Edge lecture. And I wanted to have some new pictures for that. So you're seeing them first, but I've processed quite a few macro shots, so I can use some of these brand new images in the talk, so I'm not just showing old pictures when I'm speaking. So that's a scaly head on the red soft coral, and this time here a little sharp-nosed crab popping out of a hole between the plumos and the yellow sponges. More yellow sponges, and this time another mossy or a moss head war bonnet coming out from inside the sponge. This was quite a shy individual, so it wasn't that easy to really get exactly the angle I wanted on him. I don't mind this composition, but I think it would have been nicer maybe with him a little bit more in the corner. And I would have quite liked to have got a bit more of his body, but whenever I came round for a bit more of a face shot of him, he hid back into his hole. So this was the most I could get on this particular dive. All right, back to the EMWL1. This is a wide-angle macro shot taken with the new 160mm lens. And I've just got the 160mm lens now sort of down just above the mouth of this anemone. I guess it's a rose anemone, a fish-eating anemone. And it's just hovering there, getting this nice view up through the tentacles and up the wall. It's actually a sort of shooting quite vertically upwards. And a smaller anemone now. This is a painted anemone. Here you can see with the stripy tentacles that sort of define those painted anemones. Here shot as a kind of slightly more classic close focus wide angle composition, but kind of here really more into the realms of wide angle macro with the new EMWL lens, the 160 degree. And I think I like this composition. Slightly better conditions, slightly better visibility would have been able to bring a bit more of those trees through and the clouds through from the background. But I still think the composition is successful. So here are some red Irish lords. This one here, I think this one might have been photographed with the 130 degree lens actually. And I think this shot here is with the 160 degree lens. I remember with this particular individual shooting it with both lenses. Once I put the 160 on, I so much preferred it over the 130 for shooting that I never really put the 130 back on, and I certainly didn't put the 110 back on during the trip. However, with this particular individual, I thought, he's in a good position to do both lenses. And I think actually it was probably in a slightly better position for the 130 rather than the 160-degree lens. So I think that first shot probably was with the 130. Unfortunately, because it's not recorded in the EXIF, you have to go by memory, and that's why I'm not 100% sure which one is which. But I love this angle that this kind of bug eye lens gives. It makes it feel like you're standing in front of this huge animal rather than actually an animal that's kind of, its face is smaller than your four fingers or something like that. It's actually, at this sort of angle makes it look like, it could be as big as an elephant, which I think is really cool. It kind of makes stars out of these smaller critters. This is on the same dive, another on the same EMWL1 dive. This is a Ling Cod, and it was nice to be able to shoot this Ling Cod with the EMWL1. It shows that you can maneuver that lens very close to subjects and create these sort of dramatic wide angle macro or very close focus wide angle shots, illuminating these subjects and setting them in the environment in which they're living. So he's a cool little creature, this guy. There he is. Zoom in on his eye and have a quick look. Right. There's a couple of split level pictures, I guess, coming up now. This is some bull kelp with the forests above. This picture shot. I liked this composition because I liked how the shape that the greens were making together. But I also felt it was worth processing because I think that space might be quite useful editorially in a magazine. This might be very nice in terms of the big blue space on the right hand side would be ideal for a magazine to sort of fill with text and I think make a very nice layout on a page. Or fill with smaller pictures. It's not the most exciting frame, but it's probably quite a useful one. This is a bit more of a full action frame. This is the trees, obviously, of the pine forests and blue sky. And then below the surface, there is a lot of... this is actually giant kelp. It's not the same giant kelp species you have everywhere else. It's a Macrocystis genus, but they call it northern giant kelp. And it's kind of... It looks like giant kelp, but it's kind of a bit browner and a little bit shrunk down, I guess. I don't know much about giant kelp's classification being a species we don't get around here very much. Or ever at all. But yeah, this was nice to get a chance to get a split level with kelp in the forest. And then the real reason I went in the water to shoot these split levels were for the jellyfish. And this is a large lion's mane jellyfish pulsating below the surface. I like that you see the reflection of the jellyfish in the surface here in the picture, which is kind of quite cool. And shot at an aperture of f20. The same as the previous one. They're actually both set on the same settings, f20, 180th, ISO 800, with flash fill underwater to create these split level images. I was shooting both horizontals and verticals. These are both shot with the 1635 actually, which is I didn't mention as a lens I took. I didn't only use it diving on one dive, but I did use it for the split levels. And this is another one of the lion's mane jellyfish taken with the 1635. Zoomed in a bit at this one. I wonder if it says here how much. No, it says focal length 16. I didn't do. I did do some of these zoomed in. I obviously haven't. There's quite a lot of these split level jellies, and I've only processed a couple so far. Another jelly. This is the jelly, the benthic jelly that lives on the belly. I think on the seabed. I think they call it a clinging jellyfish. It's quite a cool little creature. The water did have quite a few specks in, but it was obviously very quick to clean it up, and I decided to make this water completely dark just to show off this amazing little creature. And then a few macro detail shots, if I can keep my mouse still. These are the white spots of an unsurprisingly white spotted anemone. Then a wide angle shot of another rose anemone or fish eating anemone. You can see its red rosy base just about through the tentacles here. This one in very shallow water with lovely trees and light above it. Visibility could have been a little bit better. I think, with better visibility, you'd have really got a lovely view through to those trees. But there's still a kind of enough coming through to give you a feel of what you're looking at. More white spotted anemone dots. These ones on a diagonal, whereas the others were a bit more up and down. And then this is one of the starfish. I forget which species it is. Oh, I think it's the Vermillion Starfish, or it's another red one anyway. And I really like these little. I think they might be pedicularia rather than tube feet. Maybe they're just tube feet coming through. in this area, and I love these little crowns coming on the surface. There might be gills actually, the purple bits, and there's the madriperite in the center of it here. So it's zooming in a bit too much now, but it's kind of a very, very cool looking pattern, and a nice detail shot. The amount of color in the invertebrate life there, or the animal life there, is just incredible, and I love celebrating it with these wall-to-wall color photos. This is a kelp greenling, I think a male. I always get confused which one's the male and which one's the female. I'm pretty sure this slightly bluey one is the male. The female looks very differently. There might be another picture one. I certainly took plenty of pictures of both. These are quite large fish, probably 30 centimeters, a foot long. And they're kind of like hyperactive, overgrown blennies. If you wanted to know what they're like underwater, but they're very adorable fish because they always seem to be busy doing something, and they seem to be very upset with the world at all times and chase each other around. And if you swim too close to them, they tend to swim away, looking very upset with life. This is a copper rockfish swimming under the kelp forest. This picture, gives you an idea of how the visibility was. In the UK, we would say it was excellent visibility, but for this region, I would say the viz was a bit down. It was down actually because we had a big plankton bloom because we had so much good weather. And usually the dive season there tends to start at the end of summer when it starts to cloud over more, because the clouding over actually means that the plankton dies and the water clears. And this year it had died back a bit. In the beginning of our trip, the visibility was actually pretty good. And then with so much sunny weather, which was obviously very nice for us, the plankton bloom started up again, and our visibility dropped down a bit. So it was just a little bit limiting photographically for wide angle. Not that you couldn't shoot wide angle, it was just you couldn't shoot wide angle as well as somebody who was there in a really good week. And for me, that meant I didn't overdo the wide angle. I did shoot more wide angle than this talk gives you impression of, though. I just have processed more macro pictures for the reasons I explained earlier. Right, another little sharp-nosed crab, this time in a purple sponge. I like the jaunty angle of this composition. I think it was on an angle actually because it was the only way I could completely fill the frame with purple. But I actually quite like the diagonal that it's ended up with. It's quite fun. This is just a stiletto shrimp. A quite unusual coloured one with these spots actually. You see he's covered in the little brown spots all over his body. Stiletto shrimp, you sort of identify them by the blue spots on their body. But this one's got this kind of brown. Most of them are red, I think, out there. And here on some bull kelp stipes. Next up is it's a juvenile woolfeel. The woolfeels kind of, when they're old, they're big and ugly and grey. And when they're young, they have these incredible colours. Really handsome creatures, beautiful eyes. And this one here, this shot is actually a very fortuitous shot because one of my strobes was completely blocked by the surrounding, that this eeler kind of was hiding a little bit, and as it pulled back in, I took kind of one last shot kind of as it was slightly sort of disappearing from my view, and fortuitously my strobe got blocked. You can see kind of the glow at the top of the picture, how the strobe is blocked, and this thin shaft of light from my strobe went through and kind of lit the eel and didn't really light the rest of the frame up, and then the other strobe was completely blocked. So I kind of got this kind of snooted effect without really meaning to. So it was kind of a happy accident. All the other shots are all lit up, which is still nice as well. But I thought I'd process this one first because it was a bit more of a standout. I haven't processed any others from that particular encounter. This is a little rock crab. Are they called rock crabs? Oh, I've forgotten the name now. Cancer oreganos. It's an Oregon cancer crab. Cancer is obviously the Latin for crab, but in the UK, our edible crabs or brown crabs are called from the same genus. So kind of that very rounded crab. I just forgotten its common name. I think it's called a rock crab or something. A Malibi. There were a lot of these Malibi nudibranchs in the area, and I shot them both macro and wide angle. I've not processed many yet, actually, at all. Maybe we'll skip ahead and have a quick look at here's a wide angle scene showing you how many there are. And they're hooded nudibranchs and Malibis, and they sort of open up this hood, filter or let particles collect in it, and then close it up and swallow what's inside it. And that's how they feed. And you can see here on the kelp, it's absolutely festooned is the right word with them. I haven't processed any other pictures. I must get on with them. This beautiful beast is a cabezon. Big friendly one sitting next to some orange sea cucumbers at the background. And this just shot with single strobe. I did some dives with just single strobe with the retro reflector on it, actually, to like that. And then this back to 2 strobes for the EMWL1. This was not a balanced light shot. This was a very nice red Irish lord in a very nice surroundings, but there was just no background at all. The only angle I could shoot it was kind of straight down, so I just put a fast shutter speed and did it on a black background. There's one of those opalescent nudibranchs up here on those bushy pink hydroids in the corner of the frame. Right, we've seen those, and this is just a ochre starfish up in the shallows climbing around on a rock. Right, we're nearly there. Another scaly head. Blenny, calling him a Blenny, scaly head sculpin sitting in the things, and more of that beauty that is the juvenile wolfeel. There's a couple more shots this time, as sideways on one and a front on one. The same individual. I'm pretty sure it's the same. It's a couple of days after the other shot, but it was on the same dive site, and I would expect that it was the same individual as the previous pictures. I managed to find him twice actually, which was very, very good. The second occasion I was able to show a couple of other photographers, which was also really nice because they were able to get nice shots of him too. This is a decorated war bonnet, one of kind of my favourite species in the area. They've just got such exaggerated features, that amazing headdress. And on my previous trips to this area, I'd always seen far more decorated war bonnets than mosshead war bonnets. And on this particular trip, it was mossheads I kept finding and hardly any decorateds. But this one was really nice because it was in this lovely yellow background. And to be honest, if they're not in a nice background, I'm not as interested in them. But it was great to get that colourful background. These are EMWL1, so the wide angle macro lens, shots of a decorated war bonnet at night. So it's black background again. A couple of different angles. It was one of those subjects we were sharing on the dive, so I went down, took a couple of shots, let some other people in, and then came back later on in the dive, and he was actually in a better position. I think at the beginning of the dive he was upside down, which was quite fun but a bit weird, and then at the end of the dive when I went back there he was the right way up, which was good. And then here is an adult wolfeel. This was a fortuitous shot in that my strobe sync cable was damaged and I didn't realise till I was underwater. So the fibre optic was bent. And so I only had one working strobe on this dive. Unfortunately, I had planned already to shoot the wolfeels probably with one strobe. And I had 2 strobes on. They both had beam restrictors on them. And I was planning to shoot very hard light and was going to do some shots with only single strobe. And because only one strobe was working, I ended up shooting this wolfeel with only one strobe. And actually I was quite happy with the result. I think it gave that really strong shadow below the chin, the really strong shadow in the mouth, and the strong shadows around the wolfeel's face, which really make this ugly beast's face really pop out from the picture. Right, we have made the end. The last picture I'm not going to talk about, but it's not from Canada, it's from the other side of the Pacific in the tropics, and it's a sweet lips. It's the diagonal line sweet lips from Roger and Pat that was processed for something else but was sitting in the same folder. So there's a quick look at some of my early shots from Canada. As I said, they are some of my favourites, but I haven't gone through very religiously and chosen my favourites. So I've certainly have 1 or 2 more similar sized batches of images to show you of similar standard as I start to get on top of the pictures and process some of the pictures that won't be so quick to process. Anyway, thanks for listening. Bye.